Serving you and your community. CKVR.
Well, it's exciting to be with Christine Bentley today. And Christine, you've had an incredible broadcast career for many, many years, and you had a long tenure at CFTO and have become well-known and trusted by many Canadians, breaking many, many stories. And we wanted to get together tonight to talk a little bit about how your career got started at CKVR. So my first question for you tonight is, how did you end up at CKVR in Barrie, Ontario in the late 70s?
Well, it was a complete accident. And I mean, most people that I run into, and especially people, students or people in the industry who sort of have been studying and wanting to be journalists for years and years and years, and they're in third year, and they say, so, what happened? And I say, well, I never actually ever took a journalism course. So the story is really, like many people, I was like the 8 out of 10 people that didn't have a clue what I wanted to do. My father was a diplomat, and we moved all over the place. And so when it came time for university, his feeling was, it's not job training, it's to teach you how to think. So, it's kind of a luxury. You just go and you use your mind, and it's not, job skills or something else. Different era, I understand. So I went and I thought, well, okay, I'll take languages and literature because I loved, I did a lot of acting in high school. I did a lot of acting in university. I loved drama. My father was also the first in 20 generations who was not a lawyer. He was a diplomat. So I sort of flirted with the idea of a career in law as well. Anyway, I graduated. I didn't want to be a translator. I didn't want to be an interpreter. I didn't really want to teach. So I was still stumped I had an honors BA. And so I did a project for the government with a group of people, and it was sort of a multimedia project for about a year. And then I was still kind of, I don't know what I want to do. So I'd applied to RADA, Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London, and also wrote my LSATs and was sort of preparing to apply to law school. I mean, I was really, and law school is probably what I might have done. Because in those days, well, my parents anyway certainly felt that acting was not really a career. It was not legit. And my father was well ahead of his time in that he had 3 girls, and he did say, you need to learn to take care of yourself. You don't know what will happen. You need to have a skill set. You need to have a career, or you need to have some way of surviving. So I had a friend who worked at CKVR in Barrie, Yvonne Medill. And you may speak to her, in fact, one of these days. And she was working there as a camera woman. And again, a first, she was, how many women were there? Women camera operators were there, carrying a tripod, a CP16, out in all kinds of weather. And she was fabulous. She said, you might want to think about something like journalism, because it's half performance and half cerebral. Why don't I set up an interview or a meeting with my boss, Bill French, and see if, at least find out what journalism schools they like, and maybe think about doing that. So I thought, well, what have I got to lose? So up I went to Barrie from Toronto, and in those days it was nothing but fields. There was nothing built. It was up in the boonies. And went and had my chat with Bill French. And so we talked about various journalism schools that he liked to hire from and whatever. And he said, look, you're already here, so why don't you do an audition, and I'll tell you if you're any good on camera, So I did an audition in the studio, and I came back in, and I sat down. He said, okay, well, you can start Monday at 9. And I said, Monday, I don't know how to do anything. And he said, well, let me see, you have an A+ average, and you're willing to go back to school for 2 years. So I figure you'll figure it out. You'll learn it. And by the way, it's $75 a week. And that's exactly how I started. And I started processing film, and I did weather on the weekends. And we lived in a house with, I think there were 5 of us on Little Avenue, had no money, had maybe $5 left at the end of the month, borrowed clothes from my girlfriends to do the weather, to be on camera, and that's how it started. And I was bitten by the bug. I was completely bitten by the bug, and that was it.
What year did you start at CKVR?
I started in 1975.
What was different about broadcast journalism in the 1970s?
Well, let me see. I mean, first of all, women were a little bit rarer. So it was like many things. If you looked at a class at dental school, there would be primarily men. If you looked at a med school class, there'd be primarily men. If you looked at a law school class, there'd be primarily men. And there were primarily men working in the business. And women were starting to make inroads. I don't now, things have changed so much. I don't see broadcasting quite the same, or rather, I don't see that the broadcast outlets are owned by broadcasters, let's put it that way. So their interests are not aligned, right? There isn't so much that love of the story, of telling the story, of the beginning and the middle and the end. There aren't scoops the way there used to be. We would get a scoop and we would baby that thing. We would sit on it like an egg until 6 o'clock when we would release it. Now with Twitter and all the social media and 24-hour news, because there is very little appointment viewing anymore. People are not, for the most part, unless it's a huge breaking story, they're not sitting down at 6 o'clock like they used to as a family. Some people still are out of habit, but young people now, they're on their smartphones and they're on Twitter and going, wow, did you see what's happening in the Ukraine? News is instant. It's just instant and it's everywhere. So it was just a different era, a completely different era. But it was like I worked in this bubble where it started for women almost sort of around the time when I got in, and I left really when we were no longer broadcasters. I don't think that we are broadcasters anymore. I think we are a content chip for companies whose main business plan is to sell data plans for the 4 screens. So it's a different agenda.
What were some of the challenges at CKVR being a woman at a time when you said yourself they were more rare? What were some of the challenges you faced?
Well, I should be fair here and say that actually at CKVR itself, there were no challenges. The news director, Susan Hughes, was a woman. Bill French was hugely supportive of women. But I must tell you that in those days, if there were a breaking crime story, police officers were sort of a little didn't really want to tell you stuff. And that continued long into my days at CFTO, where I would run over to Jim Junkin's desk and say, I've got this story, but they won't talk to me. Can you phone them? And they would talk to a man and not to a woman, the cops. So there was that, and there were, but other than that, it was more the people that you interviewed that were a little bit kind of really, this young girl is asking me questions like, But the station itself and the people who worked at the station were hugely supportive. Hugely, it was just no...
How much do you think that was your age versus your sex? Like, do you think they wouldn't talk to you because you're a woman, or do you think they wouldn't talk to you because you were young?
Police, for example?
Or general public?
Well, it depended. There are certain segments for example, the police in those days, where there were no women police officers to speak of that anybody saw. Now it's a completely different thing again. You see graduating classes and they're full of women. So it was a very old boys club. So if you were talking to any segment that was very much an old boys club, then it really, I don't know whether it was age or sex, right?
Right.
But then there were a lot of people who, because of the fact that you were young and because of the fact you were a woman, they were quite protective. So they maybe wanted to give you information that they didn't want to give the guy because they felt sorry, they felt protective of you. So I'm not sure. I think in the end, I didn't feel as a news person really that the odds were stacked against me, and I never felt ever discriminated against because I was a woman in the business, not at CKVR, not at CFTO, ever, under all the administration that they had. I mean, John Bassett was, when I went to CFTO, John Bassett was a real newsman coming from the Telegram, and they all were there then, in those days. I mean, the icons, the Moses Neimer, the Ted Rogers, and he used to call up when you broke a story and be screaming in your ear, "Oh my God, you beat the sun, you beat the star, you beat the globe, we beat them, oh my God, this is amazing," that kind of thing. And Douglas Bassett was the same. He was a real newsman. And Yvonne Fetzen, who really took baton from a family. Well, I mean, it was built from Bayton to CFTO, and then they owned a bunch of stations. But Yvonne Fetzen really brought it into what was the CTV television network. The one entity, and buying up all the specialty channels and made it into the force that it was. So they were all, iconic. And I feel like I really worked with some really truly iconic people, and Bill French was iconic in that day.
You mentioned Susan Hughes, who was on camera, and you mentioned Yvonne, who was a camera person. Were there any other females you remember working with at CKVR during that time?
Yes, there was Ellie, who was the head of the camera department. So as you can see, Bill French absolutely did not see sex as a barrier at all. Men, women, if you were competent, or he thought you had talent, or he thought you could, he hired you. And the same with Bob Hurst, who was the man who's the news director at CFTO, who hired me for CFTO. I went as a summer student to CBC for the summer, CBC Toronto, and I kind of broke a story there, and that summer. And so on that basis, I think he hired me. Plus, I was just persistent. I just called him every week. I called his secretary, Barb, every week. And we got to be good buds over the summer, and eventually I think he just caved.
How would you describe the working culture of CKVR in the 1970s?
Well, the working culture was basically collaborative. I was there with people who, were iconic. I mean, I walked in the newsroom and Connie Smith was there. I mean, Connie Smith, who went on to basically, she became the queen of Hamilton. I mean, CHCH. I mean, she is still so much a part of that community. Excellent broadcaster, fabulous lady. Dan Matheson, who did sports there and then went on to CFTO and then went on to CTV National and now works at the All News station on CTV and is an excellent broadcaster as well. And so a lot of people went through there. And I found it hugely collaborative. People, the camera people would help you. The processing people, the editor would help you. I mean, everybody, we were all learning. I mean, Connie was better than me, a lot better than me when I got there, and Dan too. They had a bit more experience, but they were hugely helpful, collaborative, and we were all learning. We were young. We were learning. I mean, on a Saturday, we would have 400 feet of film, and we would go from Minden to Newmarket to, Georgina to God knows where, and be expected to have 4 2-minute stories on. So you learn that you did your stand-up. You did your stand-up once. So they used to call me One Take Bentley, because I knew that if I did 3 takes on my stand-up on film, I had no B-reel. And you would learn that you had a signal with your cameraman so that you weren't rude to people, but you would kind of pre-interview them a little bit, and then you would make a signal behind your back when he would start to roll. Then you would ask your question, and as soon as you knew, you edited in your head the clip, and then you waited 5 or 6 seconds, and then you gave him and he would turn off the camera but still hold it there so you weren't sort of rude to your subjects, and then he would go and do the cutaway shot, and then you would shoot your B-reel, and you'd go back and you'd be slicing the film, splicing it, with just bits and pieces to spare. I mean, and it was like, I learned so much. And when later on, those lessons of not having much film and having to fill all this time and having to size up people for an interview really quickly, because some people you can't pre-interview. If you pre-interview them, they're dead. Once you turn the camera on to do it again, they're just flat as, and other people need that to calm down so they're not nervous. They need to warm up to you. And so those skills of sizing up your interview subject, of being able to assess a story quickly and but accurately and in an unbiased way, and learning skills of that's my clip. Mm-hmm. I can hear the beginning, I can hear the end, that's it, that's all I need. And later, all those skills that we learned there, and that people like Connie and Dan and working together taught us, stood me in really good stead, because I remember at CFTO when we went to video, to tape, and people would come back with reams, just stacks of tape, and the editor would go, Jesus Christ, somebody doesn't know where their damn clip is. This is like insane. Like, now that we don't have film, now we're shooting 5 hours for a 20-second clip and nobody can find it. So those lessons really, that training was just superb. Just superb. And you learned how to write your story well.
Absolutely.
Because you were learning your craft. And we would watch everything that happened in Toronto, and watch every newscast, and we had our heroes, people that we thought were just amazing, and we'd watch every little trick and every little thing that they did, and it was awesome.
Who were some of those heroes that you were watching in Toronto, Christine?
Valerie Aaliyah was one of them, way back. Do you remember her?
No, which network was she with?
She was with CBC. Mm-hmm. And of course, our hero was Barbara Frum, who then was on, and I cannot remember, and it's just because I'm losing it here, but just her name, where they were on together for the National. Okay. 2 women, and her name just is on the tip of my tongue, and it'll come to me. But Barbara Frum, who was just, she was beyond iconic. And I have a funny story, actually, because she, in an anonymous fashion, called me the first time I anchored on CFTO on a weekend. She, it was late at night, it was 11:30, and I was doing the weekend, and I was scared. I was like, oh, I can make a mistake in Barrie, but I can't make a mistake here. This is Toronto. You're not really thinking that on a Saturday night at 11:30, there are not maybe a whole lot of people watching you, but hey, So I was terrified, but we got through the newscast, came back to the newsroom, and somebody said, there's a lady holding for you. And I said, 12:30 at night, seriously? And so I picked up the phone, and this woman said, hello, I wanted to wait because I know that this is your first newscast, and I just wanted to say that you just did a terrific job. I'm also in the business, so I don't want to give you my name, but I'm just going to tell you that you have a long and successful career ahead of you, and I wish you all the best. And I said, thank you. But I mean, her voice was unmistakable.
Wow.
Unmistakable.
Wow.
And that generosity, that professional generosity, because, you know, it was sort of, it's all about confidence. Mm. You know, I mean, some people don't have any skill or talent, and some people do. But the difference in people who do, who make it or who don't, is sometimes confidence. Mm-hmm. And you know, people can go to journalism school and they can learn the 5 W's, and they can learn how to backcheck a story, and they can learn how to write and how to marry the pictures and the script, and they can, but ultimately when you're in front of a camera, all that being equal, it's, do you come through the glass at somebody or don't you? Mm. And a lot of that has to do, I think, with self-confidence. Mm-hmm. So for me, she just moved me up, 6 months. She just moved me, 10 country miles ahead of the pack by basically saying, you did okay, kid. Mm. So wonderful. I thought, and I always tried in my career, in my time, to give that back as well, because it's so important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Who at CKVR, Christine, made a lasting impression on you? You talked about Barbara making a lasting impression on you while you're at CFTO. Who at CKVR made an impression upon you, and how did they do it?
I think, as you can probably tell, I think Bill French did. He was so ahead of his time. He was a consummate broadcaster, a consummate professional. He was also a consummate news person. And he could cut to the chase real quick. I think Susan Hughes was also a superb newswoman. She was no nonsense. She worked hard. We all worked hard. Everybody worked hard. Nobody whined. Nobody complained. We just worked hard because we all loved it. Mm. So, and my friend Yvonne, who would go out there in minus 40 degrees and would be helping. She trained just about every reporter that came, because the cameramen, the camera women, the camera people often do train the rookies, right? I mean, I remember being at Queen's Park for CFTO, and the cameraman there, George Stamu, he basically ran the Queen's Park Bureau. Mm-hmm. And he knew every minister, and he knew everything that was going on in that place. And so I was the one that ended up being on camera, but he was really the one who ran that bureau. Yeah.
Do you stay,
absolutely. I got to the point where I would come in and people would say, so what are you doing today, Christine? I'd go into the lounge, the media lounge, and say, I don't know. I got to find out. I'm going to wait for George. I'm just the assistant here. He's the Queen's Park bureau chief. But she was like him. I mean, she really trained us, and she had a great eye, and she would hold your hand if you were nervous, and she would. So yeah, there were a lot of. I have nothing but great memories. There was no time, there were no egos, there was no backstabbing, I only ran into wonderful people there.
Do you stay in touch with anyone?
I do stay in touch with Yvonne, and I've just recently gotten in touch with Bill, because he then went to CFTO ahead of me, and then he went to CINRAM, and then he went down to the States, and then he went. He's like a whirling dervish. He's such a talented man, and now he's running for mayor up north of Barrie. But we're in touch, and we're going to get together again. Yeah.
Do you remember any significant news stories in Barrie that you broke? I know that it was a long time ago, but do you remember any significant news stories from the area?
No, I don't. I don't remember any news stories that I broke. I mean, I remember, coming up and covering, but I was at CFTO then. I think it was just after my twins were born, covering a tornado. But no, I don't remember. I don't remember any massive stories that we broke.
Any funny stories or significant moments on camera while at CKVR? Anything funny happen that you remember? Comes to mind?
Well, there were a couple of funny incidents. One of them was we had an anchor called Terry, and I had been. We were doing a special, 15-minute special, some kind of municipal thing, and the reporter that was supposed to be doing it and had been researching it for like a month got serious flu. I mean, flu like throwing up, like cannot leave their bed. And so I was called at 6 o'clock in the morning to, you're going to have to do it. And I said, great. Well, are there any notes? No, there are no notes. So I drove to his house, and stood like a mile away from him and said, like, don't you have anything here? Nothing. It's all in my head. And he said, and I feel sick. So So basically, Ellie, she was doing camera that day, and I went and covered this thing really with like just cold, absolutely cold, and put a 15-minute special together, which I never would have done without her. I mean, I can promise you, I was terrified. I thought, this is not happening. I don't know anything about that. Anyway, so we get that done. We are dragging our butts out of there at 10:30 at night. I mean, I've been up since 6 in the morning. So is she. And he had done something. So he had false teeth and he had broken his plate. So he could not read.
Oh, dear.
So the studio cameraman came and grabbed me, pulled my coat off, and said, you're doing the news. Because he can't, whatever. And so so I read a newscast cold. Now I do remember that because it was a bit funny. I mean,
wow.
It was a bit funny in that it was just one of those days.
Oh, for sure.
It was not my best moment probably, but just one of those things that happened.
Now, you mentioned you did the weather on the weekends, but did your time overlap at all with Bob McIntyre? Was he ever there at the same time that you were?
Bob McIntyre, I think was gone just before I got there.
Gotcha.
I'm not exactly sure what that deal was. There was some parting of the ways, and then he came back after I left. So, but he was famous and well loved.
Absolutely, and he still is.
Yes.
What are some of I know you touched on this briefly before, but let me ask you more specifically. What are some of the specific things that you learned at CKVR that prepared you for the rest of your career?
Well, I learned that collaboration is better than competition. Mind you, I was hugely competitive. I would compete for scoops. And I was very proud of the scoops that I got, but I wasn't nasty about it. So, I mean, I remember, covering an inquest where I was there every day because I was a student, a summer student kind of thing for CBC. I left CKVR to take a summer position with CBC. And I was there all day, so reporters would come in and they'd just swing in for a day. And I was very generous about saying, we've covered this. This is what you're looking for today. This is what you're looking for, whatever. So I learned, I think, collaboration. I learned that, I think, the beginnings of how to tell a good story. Because ultimately today, with Twitter and with social media and with the people who rise above the white noise, who rise above the crowd, are the great storytellers. So whether you're telling it on radio, on television, through a blog, on a tweet, it doesn't matter what the medium is. Great storytelling is absolutely paramount. Checking your facts is paramount. you know?
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
I learned that because Susan taught, I mean, Susan Hughes was absolutely, she would back check everything that us young'uns would come out with, right? She would vet that script and she would go through it with a fine tooth comb. And I learned, so I learned a work ethic. I learned to work as a team. I think I learned to be professionally generous because I was the one getting it all there. Everybody was teaching me. I knew nothing. I was learning. I mean, I might have had a little bit of an ability, but really it was an ability to learn. And all these people were hugely generous in teaching me and answering questions and, you know, getting me on the right path. And so I think those are some of the things that I learned. And that, you know, if you really love what you do, if, you know, it doesn't matter if you work a 16-hour day. Do you know what I mean? It is so worth it to follow your dream. Although it wasn't my dream. I didn't know it was my dream until I was doing it. But then it turned out to be my dream.
It's wonderful. Have you retained any pictures, any memories from your time there, or is it all gone?
I think my pictures are gone. I will look for you for some pictures. Yeah, they're somewhere. They're probably down in a bin in my storage room somewhere, because I've got, you know, 37 years worth of pictures.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Christine, this has been just so wonderful to chat and to reminisce and to really hear and celebrate your story. And you've been a respected person that so many people have welcomed into their homes and trusted for more than 30 years. I know some of the people watching today would be interested in hearing just very briefly as we wrap up what you're doing today and how they can find you and tune in.
Well, actually, I, together with two colleagues, Kate Wheeler, who I worked alongside at CFTO-CTV for many years, Sharon Caddy, who was at CTV for a long time and is now at CTS, we decided that we were not done, and we still wanted to tell some stories. So we created basically a show called What She Said, which is running on Sirius XM Canada Talks, station 167, from 10 a.m. to noon, Monday to Friday. And we're really excited about that. It's also running on an online station called Connect Me Radio in the afternoon, so from 4 to 6. So we are having a great time because we are doing some newsy things, but really what we're doing is, we think, empowering, inspiring, informing, largely women. Our audience is sort of, we're geared to women, although I have a lot of men who stop me and say, I love the show because I've got 3 daughters and my wife and my sister, and they're all interested in these. And we really do something very un-Canadian, which is to promote Canadians, which I don't think Canada does enough of. We have a segment called Simply the Best, where we bring in just amazing Canadian women. I mean, gems hidden all over this country that some of them people do make a fuss over, and some of them people don't make a fuss over. And we're an equal opportunity platform. So when we discover a gem, we have them on. So that is so much fun for us. We are just enjoying that so much because it's a chance again it's back to my first love, which was reporting, which is actually talking one-on-one with people. And you know, I've refound a passion.
Well, I want to thank you for talking one-on-one to me today and sharing a little bit about your story. I know we'll have a couple of minutes offline here, but thank you so much for your time and for allowing me to interview you. And I wish you all the best, and I hope many of our viewers will tune into your radio show very shortly. And I know we got to let you go because you got to prepare for tomorrow morning, but thank you so much for your time.
You are so welcome. This was absolutely my pleasure. And I'm just so glad that people are interested in the good old days before the new VR. Way before the new VR, that's when I was there. And it was a great, great place. So thank you.